in any situation, an overdone strength becomes a weakness. And I actually think that very basic piece of advice when we think about our clients and our business owners is that a lot of the time, these really successful businesses that have grown to be businesses of size are because somebody had a really good strength in something, whether that was selling, innovative product design, the sort of actually just people management, whatever that strength was. Normally they've had this really exceptional strength, knowledge of a particular market. The issue being, of course, like anything that, as I said, any overdone strength becomes a weakness. When they start to believe that they're the only person that knows about that, that's where it goes wrong.
This is the Ryan Marketing Show, and you're listening to episode 67 of 100. Today on the show, I'm with Vicki Lawson from PwC, and we're going to be talking about all the things you need as a business, whether you're large or small, to get through all of the accounting-based and advisory-based issues and opportunities for your business as it grows. Firstly, great to have you on the show, Vicki.
Thanks, Ryan.
Let's start with a really simple question. What does PwC do?
So PwC does an amazing and probably wider range of things than people think they do. I think when people hear PwC, those people that have heard of us assume we are accountants. That's depending on some of our global competitors, we would have you believe we're the largest global firm of accountants there are. Some of our competitors may also try and claim that spot as well, but let's not get into that. I think really our absolute history and base is in that accounting, tax, compliance, auditing. But in more recent years as well, PwC has really expanded. I mean, we have teams here in New Zealand that look at things like digital and customer experience within your business. We'll have teams that specialise in treasury and a treasury strategy that your business should have. We have a full consulting team that do absolutely anything you can possibly put the word consulting next to, a very, very wide range. We've recently in New Zealand, over the last 2 years, acquired a significant real estate advisory business. And when you think about, well, how does that fit with a firm of accountants? Because that's what we used to be, and mainly. I mean, if I take real estate advisory, to me, that's the most obvious fit. Every single one of our clients either leases or owns a space that they work in. That we don't have a single client that doesn't do that in some capacity. Some of them lease and own significant space, some of them lease or own a very small space. It really depends. But they all have real estate that they deal with. So actually, these real estate advisory firms have the same client base that we have. So why wouldn't we work together? Because essentially it's all consulting at the end of the day, and it works really well to be able to go to a client and say, ultimately, we can work with you to help you solve all the problems within your business and help you execute all the strategy that you want to execute. And the more that we can do, the better, whilst obviously considering independence rules, which we might talk about later. We're not just a firm of accountants these days.
With business owners, one of the challenges is asking for help outside of your business. What is the first or one of the areas that PwC would first start helping a business owner with?
Yeah, interesting question. I think it very much depends on the business. I think because historically we're known as accountants, it's probably likely to be, and it depends what that need is that the business has when we first get to know a client. But if I was to look back at my own career, so my background is in what we call assurance, so external audit, internal audit, due diligence, anything you can put the word assurance next to. And so the kind of clients that the first interaction I might have with my clients might be that they, for example, need to have an audit. Now, why do you need to have an external audit? That might be because there's a piece of legislative requirement out there, so the Financial Reporting Act says you must have an audit. It might be that the bank have said, yes, we're happy to lend you $5, $10, $20, $30 million, whatever that number is, but most of the banks these days, as a standard clause, will say, but we want audited financials. So that might be the reason they need an audit. It may well be that actually it's a privately owned business that's the owners are looking to exit and sell, and so they're looking for some form of robustness around the numbers that they're presenting to the next potential owner. So they're coming and saying, actually, we've decided that our likely buyer is going to be somebody that expects audited accounts. We need an auditor. So if you think about they need an auditor, how do you find an auditor these days? One of the ways you can do it is that the audit has become far more regulated as an industry in New Zealand. Up until about 3-4 years ago, essentially almost anybody who either was or wasn't an accountant fundamentally could call themselves an auditor if they wanted to. And as you know, globally, the financial crisis hit a lot of businesses, and it's been really interesting to see a lot of these businesses that have subsequently turned out not to be as robust as they could have been were audited. So questions were asked as what were the auditors doing? And so as a result of that, around the globe, and New Zealand, whilst I would describe them as a slow follower in this respect, when you look at certainly the US, the UK and Australia, who generally we tend to keep up with, they became regulated far quicker than we did. So now that we're regulated, what that means is all auditors have to be registered. So if I want to audit, you have to be registered. So you can look on the Chartered Accountants Institute and find registered audits, or on the FMA website. And if you are a listed client or a public interest client and you need an auditor, you have to have a licensed auditor. I'm also one of those. And in order to be a licensed auditor, all that really means is I have to prove I have a suitable level of experience and ability. Because,
how do you go about getting that experience, and what's it like being an auditor when the whole idea is you're trying to look for things where people don't want that to be found out, or they it's presented in a way where it may not be immediately obvious unless it's to the trained eye.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because when I started auditing 20 years ago, it always used to be the standard joke that the only person more unpopular than the auditor was the IRD man when they turn up at a business's site. And I think from that perspective, actually a lot of our clients, you'd be surprised, don't try and hide things. In fact, I would say the majority of our clients see the audit as a real positive opportunity for them to say somebody independent has had a look at not only what the actual resultant numbers are, but how we operate internally to generate those numbers.
Right, so it's a confidence and rigour in their own internal processes, systems, and I guess people.
Yeah, so when I go out and do an audit, in the olden days, I think, if we like to call it that, I could have just said and ticked a number of invoices, say, to prove a particular balance. And whilst we still do that in certain circumstances, it's actually more efficient and more robust as an audit process to understand the processes and controls that that business has to whether it's manage their inventory balances, or how do they make sure that every time they sell something on credit that that customer is likely to be able to pay. What checks and balances do they have in place? Because it's easier for me to get comfort over the balance at the end of the year of the people that owe them money if I've looked at the robustness of the process they have to get to that stage. So actually often we find our clients don't hide things. Those days of when you go out and you're sort of constantly looking at what's not there are perhaps lesser. At the same time, one of the key fundamentals of the auditing standards is you have to have what we call professional skepticism. So I am always thinking about, is there an alternative explanation for the answer I've been given? And
that's a great question to ask yourself.
Yes. So when the client says, we've made X, Y, Z profit because, or we've sold less, our sales are down because, or our sales are up because, the question any auditor must ask themselves is there another explanation for why that is the answer? And that professional skepticism, and that's really hard to teach to somebody. So you think we have new graduates joining us all the time across PwC nationally. That's actually quite a hard skill to kind of teach, because it's you're asking somebody to think about something that they're not being told that isn't there. And that's obviously quite weird. So it's kind of it's an interesting challenge.
It's the unknown unknowns, as Donald Rumsfeld would say.
Yes, it's what, you don't know what you don't know. And that can be, I think as well, when we think about, we're really lucky in New Zealand. I think we have universities that churn out some uber bright young graduates, and, PwC is really lucky because we often get our pick of them and it's fantastic. But even the really smartest person it's experience that enables you to know what you don't know. It doesn't matter that you could be a straight A student, top of your class, You can have a triple major or whatever it is you get in New Zealand. Clearly, I'm not in New Zealand. I didn't go to university here. But you need experience that tells you that what you don't know. And I think that's a big
given
challenge.
that experience you've got now, what's the health of the Hawke's Bay economy like at the moment in the sectors that you're kind of key in, the wine, agriculture, forestry and infrastructure areas?
Yeah, so PwC here in the Hawke's Bay, so I would say my clients predominantly are in those sectors you just mentioned, Ryan. So, definitely wine, pip fruit, forestry, and what I would call businesses associated. So engineering in a way that, sort of transport engineering that supports those industries tends to be the sort of clients that I look after here in the Bay. And I would say generally, actually, we're really lucky in the Hawke's Bay. I think as a region, we're doing okay. And what's really interesting for me is a couple of years ago, I would have said some industries were going great guns and others weren't, but on balance, we were all right. Whereas now I look at it and I think, look, obviously subject at the moment, it's incredibly dry out there. It's the beginning of February. We could do with some rain, subject to what the long-term implications of that might be. At the moment, there isn't one individual sector that necessarily concerns me. I have a reasonable number of clients in the wine sector, and it's certainly fair to say that they're doing okay. I mean, I read in the media only last week, New Zealand wine growers came out and said that, look, this has been another good year for the wineries. And in fact, they specifically mentioned the Hawke's Bay in particular as really, to date, having almost the perfect storm, but in a good way of events. And so we're looking at, probably another vintage of a generation in the last 5 years, which is quite amusing. But anyway, it's good for us. It means that not only do I have clients that are doing well in the wine sector, but as a wine drinker, it means I get to drink some very good wine. So that's a pretty good thing.
That's the beauty of being here. When you've got an economy doing well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you take your foot off the processes and checks and balances.
No.
What are some advice for business owners out there who are doing really well and maybe are just trying to keep up with the work or keep up with hiring the right people? What things should they be doing and making sure they don't stop doing through the good times? Yeah.
My advice is always, it's really hard in times of boom when business is going well, and a lot of business owners, and particularly in the Hawke's Bay, we have a market predominantly of owner-managed businesses. So even those larger businesses of scale that we're really lucky to have here in the Hawke's Bay, the bulk of them are still owner-managed. We certainly don't have any listed companies based here in the Hawke's Bay. We have a couple of smaller issuers, and we obviously have a reasonable number of public sector larger entities. But if you sort of part them to one side, they are the owner-managed businesses. And I would say to all of those businesses, you need to run your business the whole time as if it is for sale. And the reason I say, and what do I mean when I say that, is that it's really important. And in times of when it's in boom and you're just almost struggling to keep up with demand, whether that's because you're a service business or you're selling a product, it's very easy to get caught up in we just need to keep delivering our service or delivering our product. And almost all those controls and checks and balances that you might have ordinarily had in place, whether that's we make sure we do a credit check on every single new customer we take on, that might have been your process. But when you're really busy, you just think, oh, look, we just need to fulfill the order, so we're just not going to bother. Fine, we'll sell to you. That's when you start to see the gaps. If you've developed a control or a process, you must have done it for a reason. And so you should make sure that if you've gone to the trouble of saying that's my process, you should actually implement your process. And I think it's very easy to kind of make an excuse of, we were really busy, so we decided that we just circumvent that process or policy. So I would say always run your business as if it is for sale. And that means making sure that you do have good, robust records. You have well-documented processes. I was recently really fortunate and asked to be a judge at the Hawke's Bay Business Awards. And so I was really lucky because I got to go out to a number of businesses around the Bay and ask them any question I could possibly think of.
What was your top question that you asked them?
The top question I asked was, I was actually judging in the large business category, medium to large, business category. And so the question I asked was, because I got to speak to all these business owners, was if there was one thing they could have done differently in their business over the last 12 months, what would it have been? And it was really interesting to hear, followed up by what is the one thing that when they wake up at 3 a.m, do they go, oh my God, I haven't. or oh my God, I need to.
Was there any themes across those, or were they all
I think what was really interesting was the theme that I kept seeing that in those particular businesses that I looked at was the importance of, as a business owner, knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're not good at. And just because you're the business owner, not trying to do it all. And in the businesses I went to see, and obviously it was a particular size in the category, two of the business owners in particular stood out for me because they both talked about when they'd set these businesses up, it was basically them and a man in a shed almost, you know, kind of one-man band. They'd grown over time to a certain size. And obviously in the early days, you have to do everything because financially, that's how it works. You know, very few business owners have the luxury of employing, you know, somebody to do the accounts, somebody to be the sales guy, somebody to be a production guy, whatever it is you need from day one. And so they said, but as they'd grown, it was actually recognising what was the skill that they had and the vision that they had that made them set this business up in the first place or buy this business in the first place. And therefore knowing what skills they needed to import, either from external consultants or give the responsibility to somebody else as an employee within the business to actually run.
Isn't that one of the biggest challenges for a business owner that loves what they do is as a business grows, the relevance or need to actually be on the tools, doing the thing that got the success to start with becomes less, and you're more about managing the people or the teams or the inventory or the cash flow. So what's your advice in general for how you draw that line between what you should, as a large business, continue doing because you love it versus things that you should be delegating or outsourcing?
So one of the things that, and I think it was at university, we did a course on business management. I did a maths degree, so also I'm quite an unusual accountant in that I didn't do accounting and finance at university. I did maths. The UK system is very different to New Zealand. But I did one management paper just to really kind of see what people did in the real world at university, because maths is very theoretical. And one of the things we learned there is that in any situation, an overdone strength becomes a weakness. And I actually think that very basic piece of advice when we think about our clients and our business owners is that a lot of the time, these really successful businesses that have grown to be businesses of size are because somebody had a really good strength in something, whether that was selling, innovative product design, the sort of actually just people management, whatever that strength was. Normally they've had this really exceptional strength, knowledge of a particular market. The issue being, of course, like anything that, as I said, any overdone strength becomes a weakness. When they start to believe that they're the only person that knows about that, that's where it goes wrong. So I think you need to listen to people around you, and that's listening to the other people that are within your business. Often employees are the best source of information because they're living and breathing what you're living and breathing. And then equally, I would say people like myself, I'm going to call myself a consultant because it's probably easier in that sort of language. I mean, I go in and out of different businesses all the time. But when I'm there as an auditor, sure, I might spend a reasonable amount of time every year with my clients. But at the same time, I'm not there as much as an employee. But hopefully still listen to people like me. Or maybe bankers are great, lawyers, people that are coming in and out of your business and also going in and out of other people's business. Because you can share both the successes and the failures that you have seen, and I think that's really important, just to listen.
For those business owners that do have those strengths and are now towards the end of their business career, approaching retirement, kind of in that pre-retired, maybe taking a couple of days off a week, or they've built this business and thinking now it's time to sell it, part of it or all of it. What should they be looking to do to prepare for that transition from owning all of their business to some of it, or exiting the business entirely?
So I think there's two questions there, or two parts to that answer to that question, Ryan, in that there's the things you need to do for the business, and there's also the things they need to do for themselves personally. So I think with all of these things, when you're a business owner, often as well, you don't perhaps have the same... I'm not saying, but then I have to be careful here because a lot of people who are employees are very dedicated and focused on their jobs. But when you're the owner, it tends to become a lot more consuming than when you're just an employee. And so the thing I would say, first of all, you need to do as the owner is say, well, okay, I think I'm ready to exit, but what is it I'm going to do when I have exited? And you need to think about that plan. And the reason that I say that is one of the other things I do here at PwC is, so I'm in charge of our business sales offering here in the Bay. So very much helping business owners exit the business and helping people buy businesses as well, sort of both sides. And often I've had a couple of conversations where people will come in and say, look, I think I want to retire in the next couple of years. Can you help me sell my business? And so you sit down with them and you say, well, what is it you're going to do when you retire? And they start to say, well, I want to have the batch by the sea, and I've always wanted to spend more time on my boat. But my children are now living in London, so, we've decided that we'd like to do 2 trips a year to the UK. When you start to think about what that lifestyle looks like, you then work backwards and say, well, if you're going to have that as your lifestyle, you're going to need to achieve roughly this when you sell your business in terms of value. And then you need to think about, now look, in some cases, fantastic, the business is already worth that. That's not an issue. In many cases, there is a disconnect. And they haven't really thought about it's also where does you turn to the question of value and you say, well, where does the value sit? And a lot of businesses in the Bay that we see a lot of the value is actually tied up in the current owner. So people will say, at a really basic level, you have to go to that particular restaurant because you need, the person who owns and runs that restaurant, they're amazing. So you're not going to that restaurant for anything other than you want to have that you're reliant on that person. They might be the chef and the front of house person, whatever. So you need to make sure that the value of your business is not just in you as the individual, but is actually very clearly definable within the business itself. Because otherwise what you're really doing is selling a job, which is a very different proposition. The other thing I would say, and look, this is without wishing to sort of, teach grandma to suck eggs or whatever that phrase is, you need to make sure that your business stands up to independent scrutiny. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you need to have good accounting records. You need to have your contracts with your employees, your contracts with your key customers and your suppliers documented, well-formed, organised. If they're not documented, and again, this is the New Zealand way of doing things. A lot of time I will go out to business and they will say, we've sold $1 million worth of product to XYZ individual for the last 10 years. And I'll say, oh, that's great. Have you ever had a contract? Never had a contract with them in their lives. And they haven't needed to because that customer has always dealt with that business owner. But when that business owner isn't there, you then start saying, well, if they didn't buy from you, where would they buy from? Or who could they buy from? And in some cases, nobody else. In many cases, there is always a substitution available. So you need to think about those customer contracts because that's where value sits. And then I guess as well, I want to say good accounting records and sort of that can be anything from just having your accounts actually prepared for you by an independent accountant, as most businesses do just because they don't have that in-house skill of that size, or in certain circumstances, depending on who your buyer set are, it's having them audited as well. And that's what I mean. So it depends. At probably the smaller end of town, you don't need to have audited financial statements. Much as I am an auditor and I'd love to say that's what you need to do, no, you don't. That would be a lie. But certainly if your buyer is likely to be a larger corporate or a sort of a private equity fund, the sort of the larger business, the more sophisticated investor, they're probably going to look for some form of independent audit procedures, whether that's a full audit or some kind of agreed upon procedures on those numbers.
And on the other side of it, where are the buyers coming from for those types of businesses? Is it something that happens inside the business, it's an employee that wants a stake, or is it someone locally that just wants to invest as a yield opportunity, or are we seeing things internationally where people want to buy into New Zealand? All three
of those scenarios. The best buyer of your business is somebody who can see the value that you see. So if we take that as the premise, then you say, well, actually, your employees, clearly, if they're working within the business, they're going to see that value a lot quicker than if I just turn up and I don't know, I've won the lottery or I've made my money offshore doing something, I've come back to New Zealand, I've got some money burning a hole in my pocket. You need to educate me in the value of your business. If I already work within it or I'm a customer or a supplier, so somewhere in the food chain of your business, I'm more likely to see that value and more likely to pay a higher price and a better price. So we do always, with all business owners, we would always explore that as an option. Are there any competitors, customers, suppliers, current management that you think would have the ability to buy your business?
Okay, so go within proximity first.
Yes, because they see value. It's all about value. And then beyond that, the buyer set in New Zealand, what we're seeing at the moment is there's certainly more activity coming, what we call trade sales, so corporates buying corporates. Certainly also reasonable, the private equity funds are becoming more active again, so that's good. And in New Zealand, what's really interesting in that SME market, so there's small businesses that are probably worth somewhere between, actually it's interesting, 500,000, and there's an important reason for the 500,000, but businesses between 500,000 and say about 10 million, we get a lot of overseas interest. 500,000 is quite important because under one of the government's immigration thresholds, if you invest 500,000 in a business, that is one of the thresholds that enables you to get residency. So we get a lot of inquiries from people who happen to conveniently just have over 500,000 to spend. Can we help them find a business to buy?
Does that mean then there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs out there who are starting a business just to get it to be worth 500,000 as a sale, to sell it to someone who wants residency here?
Absolutely. I mean, it's slightly more complicated, and we probably need to be a bit careful about giving immigration advice. But yeah, absolutely. There's definitely cash out there. The other thing that we're seeing, which I find even more interesting, and again, I said I'm an import. I've chosen to make the Hawke's Bay my home, and I love the Hawke's Bay.
Let's get a little bit more on that. What's your story of how you got from England to here? I'm from the north of England, just in case the accent hadn't given that away. And when I left university, which I also went to in the north of England, I started at PwC in Manchester, which is a great city. I had a really good time in Manchester. I was lucky enough to do a 6-month secondment to our Melbourne office after about 3 years. Really enjoyed Melbourne. Then I met my now husband. At the time, he was not my husband, obviously, and he had spent some time straight out of university in South Africa. So we both kind of had that slight travel bug, but we didn't want to go to somewhere where we'd already both been. So that ruled out Melbourne and Cape Town, because so then we started looking around the globe for another English-speaking country, somewhere we could go, and landed on New Zealand. So very randomly, and probably not what you'd expect from a reasonably risk-adverse, cautious auditor. Having never even lived in the same town as my now husband, we decided that we'd up sticks and move to New Zealand together. So we did, and we came here. I was lucky enough to be offered a 2-year secondment to our Auckland office. So I came out in 2004, initially until 2006. My husband would tell you that from the second we got on the plane, we were staying forever. But he knew I'd never agreed to that, so he pretended we were just here for 2 years for a period of time. And then after 6 years in Auckland, I was given the opportunity by the then partners in the Auckland office. We're one firm nationally, PwC. So John Dixon, who's our office managing partner here, needed somebody with my skill set down here, and had spoken to the guys in Auckland and said, do you have anybody? They had matched John's requirements with my abilities and said, well, actually we do. And I guess probably, even though I had no connection to the Bay, my husband's also English, they were thinking I also had no real connection to Auckland either, other than the 6 years I'd spent there. So I was given the opportunity to move to the Bay. So we did that in 2010, and I've never looked back, and it's just fabulous. So it's quite a coveted role if you can get a corporate role for a global company
in the Bay,
based in Hawke's Bay, with one of the areas that you specialise in is wine, of which we've got 80 plus wineries here. What are some of your favourite wines? What's your go-to?
What are my favourite wines? So I'm quite partial to a Sacred Hill. I'm quite like the Halo range. Although, actually no, I've got a bit of that in my wine rack. I do quite like a Craggy Range. I am a member of the Craggy Range Wine Club, so that conveniently gets delivered to my door. I've also quite enjoyed, I live in Havelock North, not that far from Tomato Estate, which I always find terribly convenient. In fact, my husband would tell you again, and it's a standing joke amongst my friends, I have a reasonably large wine collection. I maintain that's because a large number of them are my clients, and therefore when one goes to see one's client, it's only polite to invest in their business. And by invest, what I mean is I can't invest as the auditor, because that would be against independence rules, so I invest by buying their product.
It becomes a personal vote in their direction.
Yes.
Excellent. So you've obviously got a huge amount of experience in what you do, and you're a big asset to PwC here, not only in Hawke's Bay, but in New Zealand. How do you then evolve your own career in a way where it continues to challenge you? You mentioned that you've got 6 new joiners here, and there's 112, 115 around New Zealand. How are you going to make sure that you continue to develop as well in this role?
Yeah, and look, and that's a massive challenge, because I think you can become stale really quickly. But actually, I would say, so I've worked for PwC for 20 years now. no day is ever the same as the last. Every day you come to work with a preconceived idea of what you're going to do that day, and almost without exception, every day the phone rings and it's a client with some far out, bizarre query that you'd not even thought you were going to talk about that day. And so I think for me, I've always said that I would stay at PwC as long as I continued to learn. And every day I learn something new. So, and I've managed to do that for the last 20 years. So I just don't see that changing. And an example I would give you as well is one of the great things about my job, and you mentioned it just before, is I feel really lucky because I get to live in what is possibly the most beautiful part of the world. I'm surrounded by a community of like-minded, great individuals. I feel really lucky that the Hawke's Bay, New Zealand as a whole has adopted me. It's a great place to live. And yet, I do get to work for PwC, and PwC is not just based in the Hawke's Bay. So often with my clients, it might well be that I might have a client that will call me up and want to talk about doing business in the US. And so I will pick up the phone or send an email to a colleague, somebody I'll know in the US firm. And it might be that I have to do a couple of emails because I won't always know the right person in the US firm or PwC immediately, but I'll be connected to the right person. I'll be able to connect my client to that person. And we'll have a conversation and hopefully be able to help my client with their query with someone who actually knows what they're talking about in the geographical location. The other thing that's probably and we talked about it at the very beginning of the interview, is that because we're not just accountants anymore, we have so many specialists around the country, some of whom are based here and some of whom are based just in other offices around New Zealand. Often with our clients, what we find is that they might come to me for the particular specialist skill that I have, whether that be looking at their controls and their sort of systems processes, whether it's to do some due diligence, etc. Or equally, they might come to me and say, Vicki, we really need to talk about foreign exchange hedging strategies. Now, they might say that to me, and I know enough to know what they're talking about, but I wouldn't be able to actually do that for them. So I would pick up the phone, talk to one of our treasury specialists who are based Auckland or Wellington, and connect them with them. So I think the challenge for me and how I keep myself interested is it's always those new things that your clients are bringing to you. And the challenge is either how do I help them? And that might be because of something I know, or how do I help them by finding the right person that can help them?
Right. So for business owners listening, one of the things that you can provide them is you've got access and you've got connections to the right type of people and the right type of areas to solve potentially their problems that they don't even know they have. What's a way, I know we talked about this late last year, about this, you have this sort of workshop environment where...
Oh, yeah, the Come Think With Us. So, Come Think With Us is essentially what we would offer, and it's completely free. And it's really interesting because it's quite hard to give away something that's completely free because people, I think, are naturally suspicious.
That's what people think with these interviews. They say, well, where's the catch?
Yeah.
So there is no catch.
And there is no catch. So what Come Think With Us is the idea, it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's not trying to be clever. We invite business owners or the senior management of a business, if it would be listed, but generally it's aimed at those business owners, whether they be small businesses right up to large private businesses of scale. We would invite them to come into a PwC office to actually spend anything between 2 to 3 hours just thinking about their business. All too often we find that those business owners are too busy working in the business to actually work on the business. So all it is it's a session where we sit around the table. We would encourage them to bring, if it is appropriate, any key trusted advisors they have. So often that can be their banker, because a lot of these businesses work very closely with the bank. It might be their lawyers. It might be if they have an advisory board, an independent advisor that sits on that. We'll come in and sit around the table, and it's normally with 2 to 3 very senior PwC people, so they're normally partners or directors. And we basically just, the start point of the conversation is we would ask the client to provide us with their strategic plan before they come in. Now, often that's the start point of the conversation because a lot of these businesses don't have strategic plans. So you start to talk about what that will be. It's just a big whiteboard session. What the individual, the business gets out of it at the end is we give them sort of a 2-page summary of, which normally includes a SWOT analysis of the business, plus here are the key things and the key actions and the takeaways that we agreed as a group that we think you need to focus in on in the sort of medium to immediate term. And so it's a completely, as the idea is come in and it's sort of a completely free. Now, look, just in the interest of honesty, and I think it should be, is often some of those actions are things that we PwC believe we can help with. and it might lead therefore to a paid engagement, but that's not the purpose of the session. The purpose of the session is to get the business owners really thinking about their business whilst not being buried deep in the business, and that's why we encourage them to come into our office to get them away from their business.
And I think that's probably been the theme throughout this conversation, is that as a business owner, don't get too carried away with the things you love doing or the day-to-day.
Yeah.
And take a breath, take some time out and spend some time on your business and invite people in that are your trusted mentors or advisors, as well as someone that can give you potentially a perspective or access to individuals that could completely change just a couple of tweaks in your business and then send you off on a much better direction.
You don't know what you don't know, right? None of us do. So it's all about recognizing that and knowing what points you should actually invite somebody in. And as I say, and that could be anything, as we talked about, any number of people. It's not just a PwC advisor. It could be absolutely anybody to say, what do you think? It's just getting a different perspective.
And one last question. I know that PwC does some amazing work in the community, helping with businesses that aren't for profit. What's the take there? How does that work?
So it's really important to PwC, and I think Ryan, you and I were discussing earlier how we have this global statement of our purpose is to build trust and make a difference to society and solve important problems. Sounds all great. What does that mean? But on a local level, what does that mean for us? I think what that means is that we need to do all the business stuff, but actually we're also living here in the Hawke's Bay, very different to perhaps living in a really big city in that, I will take my daughter swimming on a Sunday morning and bump into 3 or 4 clients or whatever. You're very visible. And I think as a larger organisation, you have a responsibility. So PwC has the PwC Foundation. We also encourage, which is a charitable foundation that makes donations to various numbers of different organisations. We also encourage all of our staff to take 2 days leave a year to go and work out as what we call volunteer leave. One of those days must actually be to deliver what we call the FLIP programme, which is financial literacy in schools. So we go out to lower decile schools and it's just some basic sessions about what's the difference between paying in cash and paying on a credit card. Basic financial skills using our knowledge. And then sort of on top of that as well is things like we might do pro bono engagements for certain charities and other not-for-profit organisations. Or actually coming up, just to give it a bit of a plug, we're about to organise a corporate Jandal Day relay. So this is a corporate Jandal Day relay is what we're calling it. So we're encouraging all of our clients and non-clients to come. It's a team of 3. We involve Surf Lifesaving. We ask people to make a donation to enter. Last year we ended up raising, I think we wrote a cheque out for several $1,000s to the local Surf Lifesaving clubs here in the Hawke's Bay. We picked that because we thought almost everybody in the Hawke's Bay uses a beach at some point. And we think that that's Surf Lifesaving, they get no funding from the government. So we've kind of said, well, that's going to be the thing we support. And what the PwC Foundation will do will match anything we can raise in the office. The foundation will match with the same amount, so that then we get to write a cheque for twice as much out to Surf Lifesaving. So February the 22nd, I believe, is the date for that. So, send me a text. You'll find my details on our website if you want to find out more and come and join in. And obviously, Ryan, I'll put the challenge to you. Find a team and you can join in.
Sounds great. I will start working on that now that the gauntlet's been thrown out there. Hey, look, this has been a great chat. I think what I've learned from not just what PwC offers, but also your personal dedication to the role. And obviously this is something that you're passionate about, and it doesn't even seem that you're halfway through this, which is fantastic. It sounds like Hawke's Bay is very lucky to have you, and any businesses that choose to engage with you on behalf of PwC, I'm sure will benefit from it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you for your time today.
Perfect.
If you like this episode, remember to subscribe for free on iTunes. Simply search for The Ryan Marketing Show in the iTunes Store.